Well, my career path isn't a traditional one. In law school, I didn't think I wanted to do litigation, but I ended up doing pro bono work at a private firm where I worked and found that I really enjoyed being in court. So I changed after 5 years and became a municipal prosecutor and did that in the domestic violence unit and then a federal prosecutor and then to the bench. 10 years as a Superior Court judge and now on the Supreme Court. And along the way, mentorship was helpful. I didn't always take the advice that was given, but that's the nature of it. You want to have the advice so you can consider it and make up your own mind with the benefit of perspectives from other people. And I got a fair amount of encouragement along the way, not always from formal or designated mentors, but from people who were able to fill that role informally as well. The best mentorship relationships were ones that worked well because we had overlapping interests and mutual respect, and that each of us were willing to put in the time and the effort to make the relationships work. If the mentee is always waiting for the mentor to call, it's not going to work, and vice versa. Both need to be engaging the other. It's hard to know exactly what is going on in the other's lives. Both of you have busy lives, but finding and persistently finding time that works to get together is very helpful. Well, the ones that lasted were ones, I think, in which I was able to do more than just sit down and have coffee together, but to actually work on projects together. So bringing a mentor along when you have a board meeting or you're working on a project or to watch you when you're in court and trial, those experiences, I think, are more beneficial because then you have something common that you can talk about. Most of the mentors were just people that I saw something in that I wanted to try to emulate. So if I saw a quality that I believed was one I'd like to have myself, I wanted to find out how that occurred and how that works and what goes into being the kind of person that I thought I was observing. So I would reach out and say, well, can we get together? Will you meet with me? Can I watch something that you're doing? So asking for help really is how most of my mentorship relationships started. Well, I'd use, for example, when I went from the U.S. Attorney's Office to becoming a Superior Court judge. I very much enjoyed my job as a federal prosecutor, and I wasn't looking to leave. But Judge Mary Yu from King County Superior Court encouraged me to think about it and to consider that, and talked about why she thought it was important. And initially, I wasn't convinced, but the more I thought about it and considered it, the more appealing the prospect became. So her planning that idea was one key factor. Along the same lines, years before that, Justice Charles Z. Smith had suggested that I might one day want to consider becoming a judge. And I thought I needed a few more years of practice first, so I wasn't thinking about it yet. And a number of people suggested and prodded and coaxed. So it took a variety of those encounters to make me change my view. The role of the mentor, I think, is to bring a sense of perspective and calm and understand that careers are decades, not just years or even months, and to have that longer term view and to talk again about what the ultimate goals are and how we might get there and to help plan a strategy. I think that calming effect is really the main role. One of the obstacles personal to me is that I tend to be quieter and more reserved. So I would rather shy away from things, and it takes more of an effort and energy to engage. So being introspective and even introverted perhaps is something I had to consciously try and change, at least as it relates to leading committees, speaking publicly. Those sorts of things took practice and work and more of an effort than might be for somebody who's more natural in front of crowds. That's really one, maybe it's because I'm more of an introvert, that's one I really worked on my own. I would think about it and consider, well, how did that interaction go? What could I have done differently? In what ways was my introversion or shyness a barrier? And how do I help people interact with me? Because I am who I am, and other people are encountering me for the first time. And knowing myself better, I can actually adjust to help people get along with me better and take that on as my own responsibility. I've been a mentor every year since I passed the bar. I've done it through the University of Washington, I've done it through Seattle University, I've done it through Minority Bar Association programs, and I've done it by volunteering in schools and meeting students that way. So I think that it's critical for people to mentor, and if you do it right, you get at least as much as you give by mentoring. And one thing that the students have, that some of us who've been practicing for years lose, is that enthusiasm for the practice of law. And spending time with students, I think, reinvigorates that desire to do justice, and it enforces the fundamentals of why we became lawyers in the very first place. The time management is difficult. Today I had to get the kids off to school, and then the dryer broke, and so I had to stop at the appliance store to look at appliances, and gave a talk at the King County Bar, had another function, and now here I am at the Washington State Bar. So if you're asking me what I'm doing next, sometimes I can't myself remember. But the way you fit mentoring into a busy life like that is that you make sure the mentoring is part of the other work that you're doing. When you're having a meeting that a mentor may learn from, you brief the mentor in advance. Doesn't mean you spoon feed, you say, here are the things you should read in advance to be prepared for this meeting, and please join me. Then you make sure you introduce the mentee to other people who are there, so he or she has the chance to make those connections and start other relationships. Because you're not the only connection. Your role is to assist the mentee to make other relationships and to begin expanding his or her network. So integrating the mentorship into the rest of your work is the only way to do it, because there's no extra time. Well, we become mentors, as I mentioned before, because it's good for us as well as the mentee, and because we're educators, and we're also the spokespeople for an entire branch of government. And it's in part our job to make sure that civics education is perpetuated. And so speaking to students early on and engaging them and pushing them to reach for their dreams and not to minimize what they might be able to accomplish. That is our role in society. We're the spokespeople for our democracy and for justice. A couple of thoughts on the law. You don't enter the law because you want to make money. There are easier ways to make as much or more. You do it because you care about the way our society works and the rule of law and the promise that we've all made to each other. And if the reason you're going is because you agree with those principles and ideals, then I say go ahead and do it. If your point is that you want a lucrative career, find something else to do. Mentorship is important, I think, for everyone, especially someone who's coming to the practice of law and may not have much experience with it. It's a different and unique culture. In fact, each firm or organization has its own unique identity and culture. And understanding that and working within it can be difficult and daunting for someone who's not initiated. So those relationships are critical for success, for not feeling isolated if you're the only one or one of few. It's important to have those strong bridges, the friends who can help you through the rough patches that we all know we'll encounter. One mistake, if we can call it that I see mentors make, is talking too much about themselves. Our role as mentors should really be listening. If there are questions that touch upon stories, great, but just telling war stories and talking about one's own past is really not as helpful. Making sure that you're listening and asking questions is the skill you need to develop as a mentor. Yes, if you're the mentee looking for those relationships, find people that you genuinely like, and I hope that you admire at least a characteristic or two that they have, and ask them about it, ask questions, and pay close attention. When there are opportunities, take them, And if you're not getting a call from your mentor, reach out yourself, and don't just do it once. And try by email, try by phone, even write a letter from time to time, and make sure that you're doing your part to sustain that relationship. Mentors are busy, so are mentees. I think you can expect that there'll be lulls in the relationship. You can expect that there'll be times when appointments get canceled. But expect that person to make some effort to be engaged and to be a part of the relationship also. Both sides have to work at it and find ways to make it enjoyable and interesting. Introduce the mentor to your community or your family, or find ways when you can share something to make the relationship deeper than just the professional. The transition from practitioner to judge is an interesting one, and it takes time. You're switching from the advocacy role, obviously, to the role of a neutral. That takes some work in counseling, and I've worked with a number of fellow judges on that transition. And it's worked out well if you speak in advance about how it's going to operate. And so make sure if you have emergency questions, how do you communicate them, and how does the other side know that your question is urgent? And so talking about the communication in advance and planning for how you can help one another will make it more of a smooth functioning relationship. And remembering to have a sense of humor. I think it's important to be frank. If the relationship isn't working, ask why. If it's you who doesn't have enough time, admit it. If the other side doesn't seem to be involved and engaged, say, is this a really bad time for you? Are there things in the way? Should we be planning for things later when there's a lull? Tell me about what's going on in your life and how we can make this work. Like any other relationship, communication will make a huge difference. And don't be afraid to ask and say, here's what I'm hoping for from this relationship. Is that reasonable? If that's not reasonable, let me know, and I'll adjust my expectations. But it's important to understand what the other is willing to give and can give. There are a number of things about mentoring that's important. One, it makes sure that we're caring about our future and keeping that promise that we care about this profession and about society. Two, I think it helps keep us fresh and engaged in our own profession. And sometimes we haven't gone back to look at the principles for a while. And when we go back and read the Constitution or read the rules of evidence to explain an answer to a question, we remind ourselves about things that perhaps we have forgotten. So it's very good for us that way. And finally, I think it increases job satisfaction and the likelihood that we ourselves will enjoy our work and feel satisfaction from it and build that sense of community that we all strive for. I think it's important to write out your plan, not just to think about it, but to write it out and share it with each other, so that periodically you can look at it and say, well, are we achieving those? Have our goals changed? And if they've changed, how are we going to achieve our new goals? So documenting it somehow, I think, is a very helpful and useful tool.